Alright guys, I'm going to do some heat cycles on this bike. So let me see if I can get this camera to cooperate. I'm going to crank this guy up. We're going to let it run for just a couple of minutes, make sure our carburetor setting's right, and wish me luck. Hey. Now we don't want to let it idle. We don't want to keep our revs sitting at 1 RPM. We want the revs to go up and down in RPM. Make sure we're working on the intake and the exhaust side of the piston at the same time. And make sure we're getting plenty of oil in here to this crank. Now when we assembled it, we put a nice healthy dose of oil in the crank valley. And of course the cylinder and piston are oiled good. Let me just bring you over here to it. So like I said, when you're doing these heat cycles, you want to get it till this cylinder is just a little hot to the touch. What we're doing is we're expanding our cylinder and our piston. This is only on a 2-stroke. We're giving the time for the seals to all kind of melt together, if you will. It's not a melting process, but the heat does make all the seals and everything kind of bed in. We're making sure that as the cylinder and the piston heat up and they're expanding from the heat, that we don't have any issues with the piston rings not getting along with all of the port edges and the exhaust bridge. So all that, after it was bored, the edges had to be chamfered so that we had good clearance on all that after this heat swelling happens. I'm not going to rev it up too high. I just want to get that bottom end, that oil circulating real good. I'm not trying to fill the ports with all that oil from the bottom end. We want the oil to stay down there. But it's getting real good smoke. Got the 927 caster mixed 32 to 1, 93 octane. The reason we don't hold it at 1 RPM, we don't want the piston to just be doing a mono motion, or what you want is you want the RPMs to rise up and down, and that's going to make that piston work a little harder one way or the other as your RPMs are going up and down. And that's going to help break in the piston on the intake port side and the exhaust port side. You're also getting a little extra dose of oil when you get on the gas and off the gas without burning it off. Everything's looking really good so far. Sounds real good. Okay, pretty hot to the touch now, so we're going to go ahead and turn it off. We're going to give it about 10 minutes and let that cool off real good. And then we're going to do the same thing for about another 2 minutes so it's nice and hot. And then I'm going to set my carburetor. We're going to go in here first and get the idle up just a little bit higher than it should be, because we don't want it to, this motor, we don't ever want it to be in a lugging state where it's putting more stress on the rod bearings or the piston or anything. We want everything to be flowing free, flowing smooth. This is our air screw. This regulates how much air it offsets the mixture of gas that's coming up through the pilot or idle circuit, so that the fuel will come in here during idle through the smaller tube in the bowl and mix, and the more air you add to that, the less suction you're going to get through that tube, which gives you a leaner or less fuel. Now, if this screw was on the front side, then that would mean that the idle circuit is coming up through on the intake side or engine side of the slide. So this screw would actually, if it were here on the, here's your slide right here. So if the screw were on this side, you would actually have a fuel screw. And then the more you tighten the screw, the more you're shutting off the fuel or leaning the fuel that way. So we want to make sure that we have on the air idle setting, we want to make sure it's a little bit rich for break-in especially. As the piston ring seat and your compression builds up, the amount of suction that this piston is going to create, or pressure in the carburetor, is going to need to be readjusted a couple of times to keep that ratio right on the verge of a hair rich on a small motor like this. That way you're always getting plenty of fuel. The fuel actually helps to cool these engines. People say lean is mean. Yes, that's true, but lean also is hot. It's really hot. So make sure you have enough fuel to suppress pre-ignition and to help literally cool the engine. And what will happen is, if you're just a little bit rich, you're going to get some raw fuel on the piston. It's going to catch heat from the piston and transfer it out the exhaust. And that's what we want, especially on a small engine like this that doesn't do a real heavy workload. I'd rather put a spark plug in it every now and then if I had to, rather than rebuild it, or rather than burn up my crank, because also when you have a lean setting in a two-stroke, you're leaning out the amount of oil that's going to come down here into the lower crankcase area to lubricate your rod bearing on the crank. So if you've watched the first video, the walk around, you know that we've done a pretty extensive, what I would call a mild domestic restoration, as if this were a rider, or we're not taking this to the make-em auction or the best in class show. We're just trying to make a nice revised rider out of this again, and it's coming along real good. So the next video will be second heat cycle, setting the carburetor, and then we'll be going for a ride. So stay tuned.